when did you feel that you needed to do more? What was it? What was the impetus for it? I know that, I don't know if you spotted the fact that Bert Berns was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016, like yesterday, like a minute ago.
Like in April.
Like in April. That's a big deal.
And that was not supposed to happen for a long time. When our dad was lost, completely lost, we would go anywhere and people would know the songs, just to chat On Sloopy, we used to say Bert Berns, I just had no idea. I remember when I first started working in the music business, one of my goals was to try to do a tribute album. I remember that everybody did a tribute album, so they do a tribute album with Bert Berns, we get Springsteen to do a cut, they're like, but Bert who? So Brett and I really, it was just so frustrating. He was lost, all of his peers were getting inductions into the Songwriter Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and always Bert who. And really, in our early 30s, I guess, we kind of took it on ourselves. Brett, I mean, I really have to give him all of the credit. He put together a sampler of the songs. The songs came back to us with a copyright thing. The author dies in the first term of copyright. The songs come back to the widow and children. And that really catapulted us into the record business, where we had a say of how the songs could be used. And so then we started the sampler and started trying to plug the songs. A little bit of soap will wash your laundry, like, come on, like record these songs. And we just didn't get anywhere. And Brett said we have to tell our dad's real story, this story with the mob and not pulling punches, and the truth about Neil Diamond, and that then he would get recognized. And here we are. He did it. Good job. And Bob Sarles.
So Brett started shooting these interviews about 9 years ago, because there's a lot of people up there who are gone now. And my advice to anybody who has an idea about making a biographical documentary, don't wait. Because there is, an attrition that happens over time. And so Brett had the foresight to get some talent together to help him get these people on camera and get their stories down. And what Brett didn't know about filmmaking at that point was more than made up for the fact that these people sincerely loved Bert Berns. And they opened up to him in a way that they wouldn't have opened up to any experienced filmmaker. And so the interviews were really heartfelt, because these were people that were connecting with Bert Berns' oldest child, who didn't know Bert Berns. So they, there are a lot of tears in the dailies. There's a lot of heartfelt testimonials that Brett was able to get over a long period of time. And then, as often happens with a lot of these projects, you sort of get, it's tough to get the rubber to hit the road sometimes, and actually taking this footage and molding it into a story that works. So fortunately, Brett and I have a mutual friend in Joel Selvin, who wrote the biography of Bert Berns, and it was published a couple of years ago. And I went to the book signing in West Hollywood. I was living in LA at the time.
The title of that biography?
Here Comes the Night, the
Dark Soul of Bert Berns and the Dirty Business of Rhythm and Blues.
It's a long time. And it's an excellent book, but it's about much more than just the Bert Berns story. It really captures the entire era. It's a sprawling, wonderful book. But if we had turned that book into a movie, it would have been a 7-hour movie. So I went to this reading in Hollywood to see my friend Joel Selvin do a reading from the book, and afterwards there was a lunch, and I found myself sitting next to this guy here, and we introduced ourselves to each other, and he let it slip that he was making this documentary about his father, and I said, well, listen, my wife and I have this little production company, that's what we do, we make music documentaries. And he said to me, oh, I know all about you. Selvin's been telling me about you for 5 years. I fully intend on hiring you to help me finish this film. So I didn't realize I was being set up on a blind date that day. And now Brett is my brother from another mother. We've we kind of went through it together, and this film is what came out on the other side.
Does anybody have a question? Oh, there's one. I'm going to be further on here now.
I don't need a microphone, really. I can speak.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
So, after your dad died, did your mom ever live, did you guys go and live in that house, that beautiful house? No.
No, we were moving into the house on Monday, and he died that weekend. So, you know, the reason there's also to answer a question that gets asked sometimes, like, where's the video of Bert Berns? Like, we made this film about any video of our dad. Just none existed in the world, because our mother told the story that, you know, she was so distraught she left the hotel room and she went and stayed someplace else. And the next day we just threw everything out on the street. It was all the photos and, you know, videos from the family. So we never moved into the house. It went into, you know, sort of a state thing, and there's a family living there to this day that's been there all these years, for 50 years. Yeah, yeah, and those are the actual shots of the house during a blizzard last year. But we never got to move into the house.
Guitar-shaped pool still there?
The guitar-shaped pool is exactly the same. You know, the family are actually joke around. They say, "You guys, once you like start to make a little money after you've thrown all your money into a Broadway musical and this film, you should come back and buy the house from us."
And we got very, very lucky because we had basically finished the film. And I had come out here last fall and shot a bunch of exterior shots, the penthouse and the house in Tenafly, and you know, the exterior at 1650. But you know, it was beautiful weather. It was like 75 degrees and blue when I came out here from California to shoot those shots. And one day last winter, I think it was in December, Brett called me up and he said, "There's a huge storm happening in New York. So I got a friend of mine who's a cameraman who lives in the Village, and he trudged up to 1650 and got the shot of the snow in front of 1650. These guys drove, when everyone was being told to stay home, these guys drove over the bridge to get a shot of the house in the snow. And Cassie lives a couple blocks away from the Riverside Chapel, and she went out with her iPhone to get that shot. So it was like, it was just, yeah, it was an act of God that we were able to get exactly the snowy shots. And because the city was complete, it was a, you know, storm of the century. You guys lived through it. There were no, cars were banned from Manhattan.
They canceled Broadway that night.
Yeah. So we were able to get a shot of the Riverside Chapel with the snow with no cars in front of it to give away what year it was. So it was really an act of God.
What happened to your mother? I mean, she was so young, and what happened with
The
her?
question is, what happened to your mother? She is
Watch
so
for
young.
Bang 2, the Eileen Berns story.
Yes, she's living in Nashville. She's very supportive of what we're doing, but she hasn't. We had a musical off Broadway in the summer of 2014, and we're trying to take it to Broadway next season. And she didn't come to see that. It's very hard for her, very painful. Brett tried to get her to do this interview for the longest time. Finally, she said she would do it. So I don't know. She's warming to the ideas.
And she wound up being incredibly, talk about how successful she was.
Yeah, she went on. I mean, Neil Diamond and Van Morrison jumped off the ship as soon as our father died, and she took the record company, and she had the label with no artists on it, and she discovered a singer-songwriter out of Meridian, Mississippi by the name of Paul Davis. You want to sing?
I lost my voice.
If I look in your eyes, I go crazy. Sorry. But she had 10 years of hits with Paul Davis and Evo Bryson and Brick, and she really became one of the greatest women in the history of the record business. And we lived in awe of her. You know, she was a towering giant.
Built the studio in Atlanta.
That's right. Yeah, she was like, you know, the king of the queen of the Atlanta music business, and was respected and feared all over the country. You know, and she really is a character, just like in the film. You know, she sold the company in '79 to Sony, and you know, we kind of grew up in the oblivion of Atlanta and the suburbs. I went off to college and then went to the Israeli army, and when I came back, we got the copyrights back, as my sister said, and then that really led us on this journey of discovery and telling the story.
But in the record industry, Eileen Berns is a legendary figure. And, you know, she really did not know the record business. She was 25 with 3 kids and inherited this label. And really, for the next 25 years, was a powerhouse in the record business.
How different is the Broadway play going to be from the off-Broadway play?
How different, right, how different is the Broadway play going to be from the off-Broadway? But we're talking about this coming summer, right?
Yeah, I mean, the musical is an incredible experience, and Cassie and I wrote a draft of a musical knowing nothing about theater or Broadway, but we knew the songs were autobiographical, and we knew that the story needed to be told, and so we spent a couple years writing this musical that really was too long and convoluted, and we moved to New York, and we came under the wing of one of the great producers on Broadway, Elizabeth Williams. And before we knew it, we were at the New York Theater Workshop doing workshops, and you know, where Rent was born, and then we spent summer at Vassar, New York Stage and Film, while Hamilton was doing its off-Broadway work, and we really fell into the sort of the bosom of the non-for-profit theater community in New York City, and we had an off-Broadway production in 2014 that you know, was really a big success. The New York Times gave us a positive review, called us Gorgeously Tuneful, and we extended by popular demand, and we've been sort of working on fixing things that were, there was a developmental production, so we've done some work on the show over the last 2 years, and we're aiming for Broadway. But it's essentially the same show. It's 4 songs out, 1 song in, you know, we've done the work, but yeah, it's coming next year. The cast has also been with us from the beginning, and we have some of the greatest actors on Broadway in the show. Linda Hart is a dear friend of yours, Gina, I know, and she plays our mother in the show, and she just, if anybody here saw it, she stopped the show with this 1 song. And all these other great actors, we've done some changes as well, so, you know, it's the kind of thing we don't say anything about until we actually get there, we become disciplined. But yeah, it's really exciting, this musical. It's Piece of My Heart. So yeah, the musical is Piece of My Heart, and yeah, it's just been an incredible long journey for us to get it there. And you know, Cassie and I are producing the show with Steven Van Zandt and Paul Schaefer and a guy named Joe Grano, who's one of the big producers of Jersey Boys. So yeah, we're coming with
We're all coming for opening night. Any questions? Yeah, there's one.
I'm just curious, by the time you had finished making this film, was there any pivotal moment where you really felt that you learned something about your dad that you didn't know before?
Question was, by the time you finished making this film, was there a pivotal moment where you felt you learned something about your dad that you didn't know before?
Great question. You know, I learned so much along the way with Joel Selvin that I had no idea. Joel really opened the world to us. He played us songs we had never heard. He told us stories we didn't, have any idea about. We helped him connect dots. And so along the way, through the film, there were so many discoveries. The biggest discovery for me, really, is, and this is going to go on a little limb here, but our dad was the most obscure songwriter-producer of this whole time and place. And we couldn't, like my sister said, we couldn't get arrested. Nobody would pay attention. And the deeper we dug, I'm convinced that he was not just the most obscure, but arguably the greatest. And the reason for that is because, unlike all the other songwriters and producers of his time, he didn't have a permanent songwriting partner. He wrote half of the songs on his own, and the other half with everybody from our mother to the milkman, including guys like Van Morrison and Mike Stoller, so he could collaborate with anybody. And so he was songwriter of standards, consummate record producer, he had his own record label, he did the trifecta, and nobody did that. And then he was, really was at the foundational level of uptown soul music. Those first Solomon Burke and Garnet Mims records were the beginnings of contemporary soul music. He was the only American producer to work in the UK. I mean, I feel like I could keep going on and on. In 7 short years, he created a legacy that was, rivals anybody else in that time and place, and he really did it on his own, in his own way, And so I like to make an argument that in time people might actually see him as, not that you can really qualify these things, but he's certainly one of the greatest, and that was a real discovery for us.
come to grips with the material and to figure out what the framework would be?
You know, I think the most important part of the job, which I was a little bit fearful at first, was really getting the trust of these two. Because Brett, yes, because they'd shown me a cut, and Brett was kind of invested in that cut. And it worked on a lot of levels. It worked in terms of helping identify for me what material he thought was the most important. But it didn't quite work as a film. And what I was proposing, you know, initially Brett was, you know, you don't want to spend any more money than you have to. And so Brett was saying, can I hire you for a couple months, maybe make it look like a Ken Burns film? And I said, well, I'm not really interested in doing that. It's going to take more than a couple months, and I think when I'm done with it, we'll have something to look more like a Martin Scorsese film. And I said, you're going to have to trust me, and it's going to cost a little bit more money than you want to spend. But if you bear with me, I think I can turn this around. So I had their confidence. But once I started sending them cuts, once I got like 10, 15, 20 minutes of it done, they sort of saw how the story could be told in a certain way. And Brett was, you know, very involved because he knew the catalog so well, the songs. So making the songs, to answer your question, another way, Brett came to me and he said one of the things he wanted to do was score the entire film with just his father's songs. And, you know, as an experienced filmmaker, I said, well, that's ludicrous. It can't be done. We're going to have to hire a composer. We're going to have to score stuff. And you're never going to be able to afford all these songs. So, and also the problem with scoring a film like this, with songs, is these 45s were meant to be put on the radio. The songs were produced in a way that there's like 15 seconds of intro for the DJ to, like, you know, and here's another hit from, you know, and then they would stop just as the lyric came in. So there's not much music there before the lyrics come in. And in these songs, there's usually not that much of a musical break in the middle either. And as an editor, you're always looking for the intros and the breaks to find the score, because you don't want the dialogue, the lyrics to be fighting with the dialogue. So I told Brett that can't be done. He kept pushing me, and he kept finding the right songs that work dramatically. And in the end, I'd say about 85 or 90% of the music that's in this film are songs that Burke produced, right off the records. And then for legal reasons, and then for thematic reasons, we had my good friend Barry Goldberg, who's a famous musician. He came in with some of the best musicians in LA to do some incidental music that's in the film that sort of fit in the mood of everything else. So, you know, that was something that I learned from Brett, that we could do that. We could actually score the film with his father's music.
That was good. And here's the second one. Oh, who was the person who got behind the camera to interview Keith and Paul? And what was said that wasn't on camera?
So much you can't use. Well, no, I mean, Brett would
I
say.
know it wasn't language, because language was there.
Yes, there's a lot of language in this movie, but that's it. But I would sit sometimes with you, and they would talk straight to us. When they were talking to the kids about our dad, and we never knew him. I mean, I say in the movie that my memories are somebody else's memories. I feel like I can see these stories, but they're not my memories, you know. And then the people like talking to us. You see, I mean, Brenda Reed's got tears in her eyes when she's telling these stories. And for McCartney and Keith, I mean, we were so nervous. It was ridiculous. And they couldn't have been nicer, more warm and inclusive, and just shared the love. I mean, there's so much love for our dad in this movie. And I mean, I feel like I know him better. The soul records is really where you get to know Bert Berns, and that's, I don't know, like when Charlie Thomas says, and Bert said, do it, it'll make you feel better, and I think that's one of my favorite parts. That to me said a lot about who my dad was. So, thanks for watching.
Technically, you know, when we were editing, it was a trick because they were always, the characters that were being interviewed were often referring to Bert as your father. And, you know, when I was editing it, I didn't want Brett to be present in the interviews. I wanted them to be speaking to the audience. So there's a lot of trickery to sort of pull that out of there, because they didn't refer to Bert as Bert Berns. They always referred to him as your dad, because they were speaking most times directly to Brett. I came on after about 90% of the interviews were actually already in the can, because they were done over a long period of time. So, some of the interviews were done after I came on, but I wasn't able to go to New York for those interviews. At one point when I was editing, because there's all this stuff in the book and about Sylvia, Brett's aunt, Cassie's aunt, and Bert's sister. And I just said, it's a shame she's not around to be interviewed. He says, oh no, she's alive. And I said, well, my God, we have to interview her. So apparently she turned down a few attempts to interview her, but I insisted that Brett twist around whatever he needed to do to get her in front of the camera, because I thought it was really
What
important.
did it take?
I begged her for, years, and then I went over, came here to Long Island, and I begged her 4 hours straight. And she was just like, here. And then at like 4 hours, I was just like on my knees begging still, and she goes, how am I gonna even get there? And I just thought,
So you had it.
she was amazing.
I was lucky enough to be a part of the Keith Richards interview, and that was a trip. That was great.
That's like,
I mean, Brett was sitting in front of him, and I was sitting like next to him by the second camera. And Brett did most of the interview, about 80% of the questions. And at the end, I followed up just to get a couple things that might have not been covered. And then afterwards, I mean, I have like 10 seconds of this video. I went over to shake his hand, and he says, well, is that all right, pal? You know, Keith Richards called me pal.
John Bon Jovi was interviewed by Charlie Rose this week. I don't know if anybody caught it, but he said he's never met the Rolling Stones, but that as far as he's concerned, he would give anything to sit in a room just to listen to them talk. So I would say you've had a privilege that Bon Jovi. So we had, somebody over there.
Yes, earlier in the interview, you mentioned about obtaining the copyrights. Is that something that you had to work for, or something you inherited, and is it something that was necessary to make the film as well as the show?
That's a great question. Yes, we didn't know growing up that we were going to get the copyrights back. It was a real shock. Like I said before, I went to college. My dad was a Zionist and wanted to fight in the 6th Day War. We couldn't put this in the film because it sort of was an amazing story. But so it was one of those stories that my mother told me. He was a Zionist who loved Israel, wanted to fight for Israel. And so, what did I do? I graduated college and I went up to Israel and I served in the paratroopers and I fought all over the place, and it was an amazing experience. And I did it to sort of make my dad proud of me. It was really one of the motivations. And I came back for a visit. I was going to go back to Israel and do the officer's course. And she says, we're getting the copyrights back. And really it was, I didn't even understand what she meant at first. Like, what? And so the author dies in the first term of copyright, and the copyrights revert back to the heirs 28 years later. So all of a sudden, I had to, with my sister and my mother, create a publishing company to sort of get these copyrights back year after year. And like a little chip off the old block that we were aggressive in, sort of like recapturing rights and things like that. And amazingly, the copyrights have helped my father. I mean, how do I say this? They paid for the documentary. I mean, this is a self-funded film, and the musical was very difficult for us to raise money for an off-Broadway commercial production that had no chance of recouping. If anybody wants to invest in a Broadway musical, maybe afterwards at the back of the it's illegal. That was a private solicitation.
Private solicitation.
Yeah.
All friends, it's
yes.
on camera.
But no, all joking aside, the copyrights did pay for my father's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because the documentary has made that happen, and the musical made that happen, and the book that Joel Selvin wrote, which we helped support, made that happen. So that's one of the sort of sweet ironies of the story.
How many of those songs were copyrighted to date?
in the catalog.
I mean, I think there's like 297 songs or something like that. When we did a copyright search, that's the first thing you do when somebody tells you you're getting songs. So you get a search, there's all these titles like Show Me Your Monkey and Sticky Sticky. And we're like, what's Sticky sticky. Look, when we were kids, again, like before the internet, before eBay, we would try to find our dad's songs. I would be in London on business or something. I would go to a record store and just fingers bleeding, flipping through the bins, trying to find Bert Berns' name on the back of records. And then somebody told Brett about eBay and that he spent years searching eBay for the 45s. And if I tell you that he found almost every one of those records, I mean, how many are maybe 8 that are missing from that original copyright search? So he recorded, he copyrighted almost everything he ever wrote, and these songs were completely lost. And now songs like If I Would Marry You or Show Me Your Monkey are in this, and they're featured heavily in the musical. And we have unearthed, like you find a Picasso in the attic in the Hamptons, remember that years ago? It's still a Picasso. We found Bert Berns songs that the world has yet to hear, and they're as delicious as the ones that are famous. So that's one of the fun parts for us, is to be able to bring these songs out and forward. You know, he obviously loved them. He cut them multiple times on several artists. And yeah, he cut almost everything he ever wrote.
So how many altogether did you say?
Just shy of 300 songs.
300 songs, and he died at 38.
And 51 records were on the charts.
Unbelievable.
In that short period of time. Pretty amazing.
Amazing. Amazing. I have somebody right there.
So when did you realize that you're your father's mob friend? He's a big part of the movie, makes the show moving away.
Question is, when did you realize that your father's mob friend would be such a big part of the movie?
Wazzle.
Yeah. We grew up hearing, whispers about our dad's mob connections. My mother would, one of my earliest memories, she would crawl into bed with me, sometimes late at night, and a little sort of tipsy after being out running, hustling record labels, and she'd say, "Your father wasn't a gangster. I don't want you ever to think of your father as a gangster." I was like 7 years old. I didn't know what she meant. And then as we got older, I heard about Tommy, and I heard about Patty, and I heard about Wazzle, and then when I understood, it wasn't until I came out of the Army and I moved to New York for a minute, and she says, "I'm going to introduce you to Wazzle. We're going to go eat Wazzle at the Sambuca restaurant on 72nd Street." And there he was, sitting with Dustin Hoffman, and he was giant of a guy who really scared the hell out of me. I couldn't understand a word he said. I couldn't repeat everything. He was like,
Do you understand boink boink?
boink, boink, yeah, Juana, boink, and it was like, it took me years to sort of be able to understand what he said, but, and then we got so close to him that, I could talk for hours about Wazzle, and he was like a father to me, and especially to my sister, and they lived right down the street from each other on 72nd Street, and this went on for decades. We became so close to him. I used to like go out to the restaurants with him in New York, and I'd act like, tough guy, whatever he was, just pretending to be. But, everywhere he went, people, knew who he was, and, he really was until, his 90th birthday, sort of this, like, yeah, and we took care of him to the day that he died. He died about a year ago, his 90th birthday.
We have a question over here.
Hi, thank you for connecting the dots in a fucking fantastic way. It's so cool to know all of this, I have to tell you. I named one of my cats Sloopy, so that's my favorite song. I'm just wondering what your favorite songs are, either hit or obscure.
There's a song called I'll Take Good Care of You that's in the movie. I don't know. I'll Take Good Care of You. That, I don't know, when I was younger, I would just put that record on, because that was one of the ones we actually knew about. I would feel very close to him. Later on, hearing all of these 45s that had come to come home, there's just so many. There's the Exciters have a body of work, not just Tell 'Em, but there's several tracks. There's a song called You Got Love. You guys want to search? It's just the deep soul. Those are my favorite records of our dad's. And Irma Franklin's Piece of My Heart is just a masterpiece.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I love Piece of My Heart, Cry Baby, those of the hits, those Uptown Soul records are my favorite. And then out of the obscurities, there's just dozens of them. There's a song called Baby Come On Home, Hoagie Lands, and there's an interesting story behind that song because it was done by Solomon Burke, and then Led Zeppelin recorded that song during their first album, and it never made it to Led Zeppelin 1. And there's a long story behind that. Why? Because that came out of Atlantic Records, and we saw what happened here with Atlantic, and that song disappeared forever. That version with Toby Lands is one of my all-time favorites.
Do you have any questions for the audience?
How many of you are going to tell your friends to go see this movie? So, we love awards. This is wonderful that these guys got this award. We'd love to get an audience award, so vote often.